Welcome back to the panel discussion, The Roadmap to Windows 10 Migration in Government, sponsored by Iron Bow and Dell EMC on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. My guests today are Ray Perry, Program Manager, Air Force Enterprise Configuration Management Office, Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama; Tim McGrail, Acting Director, Network Operations, Department of Commerce, International Trade Administration, Office of the Chief Information Officer; Wayne Salarday, Services Sales Director, Dell EMC; and Steve Bilbo, Army Enterprise Architect at Iron Bow. I'm your moderator, John Gilroy. Well, Steve, I got a tough question for you here. It's an automobile analogy. You know, when I was young, I worked on my car like maybe everyone around this table. And when you think about this transition to Windows 10, there's some people in the federal government who quoted as saying that this is like changing the wheels while driving the car. Is it that hard, or is it more like changing the water pump when the car's in the garage?
Yeah, I think it's always based on subjective perspective. If you're, have a mission that needs to move forward at a rapid pace, trying to do an implementation like this could disrupt you doing that mission, and therefore, yeah, you do have that, wheels on a car analogy is very good. But there are a lot of users that are not in that space. And so I don't think it applies to everyone because most of this would be disruptive for or non-disruptive for 80% of the users.
You know, Ray, I was last night I was sitting in a lecture at Georgetown University by a rocket scientist from Alabama, of all places, and his name is Todd May. He runs the Marshall Space Flight Center, and he talked about having a big challenge in front of him. This is Mars, think of Mars, and he had a specific budget, and the budget got changed at the last minute, and so he talked about his critical path. And I thought, well, there's a rocket scientist thinking, but critical path can apply for many different aspects. And so if your path is to make this change, what are the strategies you would suggest my listeners or viewers can have? What's the first? Should they first audit the systems? Should they worry about security? Should they have maybe a test environment? What kind of general guidelines would you suggest for a critical path for people listening or watching?
My first step out of the blocks is really thinking what can possibly be the adverse impact of a capability of this on your current operations. And I think that's what Steve was talking about a while ago. And then, you want to take small steps. You want to pilot a capability. That is the best way to really fill out that adverse impact, or even more so positive impact. It may not be much of an impact at all. My users may like it, okay? A lot of times you can do it in a lab environment, but your true test is always going to come in your operational environment. So if you go through that approach, and I think I used the term earlier in terms of methodical, you've got to take a methodical approach to doing this. And transitioning to some of these things is not really new. I'm going to use the Air Force as an example. We transitioned from XP to Vista to Windows 7. We did not do as much with Windows 8 and 8.1, but this is not new in terms of how to go about doing it. Now, the newness coming is how is it really impacting your current clients? Because you're probably going to have to tech refresh more of those than ever before. You were able to at least live a lot with the hardware as you transitioned earlier. And if I look at truly compatible hardware and use the Air Force as an example, roughly 20% of our current legacy operation clients can take this on properly configured. That's 80% that cannot. 80% needs to go through a tech refresh.
Boy. Wayne?
Yeah, the other thing that I just wanted to add to that, just an idea based upon a process that we typically use within Dell EMC, is that we've done a tremendous amount of whiteboard sessions for our customers around Windows 10. And what this is it's a way for us to just come in and sit down and talk to the customer about where they're at in their journey and talk about an as-is to-be environment. So we typically can work that in conjunction with a partner such as Ironbow, where we come in and we sit down and we'll literally provide a roadmap in an as-is-to-be environment.
Tim?
While we're going through our migration, one of the things that we've started to understand is the business has some very specific needs. A collaboration need, they have a mobility need. And one of the things that we're proposing is increasing our training to the field and providing them, I'll say, use cases for the office of the future. What do they actually need out there in the field? So I think it's important that they have that compatibility from, right now, the closest is Windows 7 to transition to Windows 10. We have Windows 8.1 users out there that are having challenges, but we think we have to step back and really focus on what does the end user really need from a mission perspective.
Steve, I don't know if you're listening, but Ray used a 4-letter word. User, U-S-E-R. So where's the user? What is the user? Forget about him. Who cares? What's the response to Windows 10 from a typical user?
Typical user?
Yeah.
Oh, what are you doing to me? Why are you
Whoa,
doing
what
this? You know, I can't believe this is happening. Everything's working fine. I don't need to do this. Why can't I bring in my laptop from home? Why can't I use my iPhone?
Yeah.
I broke my system and I don't know where the power button is. I think that's the responses we're going to get, you know, a variety of
Well,
responses.
Tim's probably answered some phone calls from upset customers, users. What have they said?
Well, we haven't, to be honest with you, we're really at the initial stages of the deployment. So right now, over the last month, we haven't had a lot of calls for Windows 10 issues, which again is surprising. But I think that the user is prepared for it. We told them it was coming. They said, well, we really want, and we deployed Surface Pros, and they said, we really need this, so we'll deal with whatever you give us. Again, that's not everybody, that's the user base that we deployed to. I think we're going to find more challenges for the people, as you said, I've been doing this for so long, I don't want to change. Well, why are you doing this to me? And we are going to get those phone calls, but I think that, as I said earlier, if we prepare them for it and give them a little bit more understanding of what the capabilities are, I think we'll really be in a good shape going forward.
Yeah, Ray.
Just to add to that, a lot of users are already using this at home.
Right. If 350 million active users,
let's be realistic
in
in terms of the Microsoft model was allowing your current Windows 7 users to download this and transition to Windows 10. So we're probably, from a government perspective, sometimes behind the curve in terms of what that user is currently using at home. So I don't think it's going to be a big change for that user in terms of those dynamics. Because of that, yes, you're talking about, okay, looking for the start menu or whatever. We went through that to a degree with 8.1. So whatever capabilities you've already deployed, you've already given them some of that, at least visibility into that.
I think 8.1 is one of the bad Star Trek movies. But Wayne.
And just to add to that, I think a lot of it does come down to the actual implementation and deployment, and again, going back to planning, right, and making sure that when the user does take over the Windows 10 environment, that their applications do work, that the user experience is solid, and again, that goes back to, in that deployment, making sure that you do have training, right, built in, so that it's not brand new to them when they come in and turn on their PC in the morning.
Yes, Steve.
You know, we've done, Dell is leading, right, in doing these deployments across the nation, primarily in the commercial space. But the way we do this, and the way that I think all of us have done this in the past, when it comes to users, training and all these things are important. It's the management of the program that's important. To have a method of communication or communication plan that's part of that approach. That you put in change and release management, and that it's synchronized with that communication plan. So you're letting new users know, hey, here's what's going to happen, here's what you can expect, here's some of the problems you might see. And so that when you kind of get past that first wave of users that you brought in, when you get to the harder systems or those that are possibly incompatible or harder to integrate, you now have a set of lessons learned, not from an IT perspective, from a user perspective. And so those users that have transitioned start to become an advocate, like, hey, this was no problem, this was helpful, we're okay with what we're doing. It is more intuitive, which as advertised, and so yeah, you know, we recognize there are going to be some
So
challenges.
Tim, is this a customer testimonial or?
Well, it is to a point, and that's where I was going. It's really finding that power user out there in the user base and saying, hey, we're going to deploy this. Are you guys ready for it? And then letting them be the advocate. To your point, Steve, that's important from a transition, because when you get that forward momentum, or you get that momentum from the user base, it's going to be easier for you to deploy going forward. And
Yes, Ray.
I want to add something, and I'd be rather remiss if I didn't mention this aspect of it. And we're talking about users, and I failed to mention, especially when you're talking about a specific application that is designed for a functional user group. And someone mentioned earlier about ensuring the compatibility of that. Just because you want to transition that user doesn't mean that his application that he's using on a daily basis functionally is going to work properly in that environment. I take the government, for example, here again, and that is a lot of times when we go out and actually get a vendor to provide us to develop a capability for us. Sometimes it is developed for a given baseline operating system. Steve, you're looking.
Thinking of TDMPS.
I'm thinking I can call quite a few names, and therein lies some of the challenges that you're going to face. And so you've got to at least start that process early on, even if it is a beta product before you go operational, is allowing them to test in an environment where they can look at the compatibility of their application against what you're trying to produce.
Sandbox. Is that right,
Yes.
Steve? Tim?
that needs to be built into the acquisition process. To really, if you know from a strategic perspective you're going forward with a new operating system. The other thing is, I don't think you want the vendor to lock you into a specific operating system.
don't.
That's
However, that's-
I agree, that is a challenge. We've run across that in the past, and I think that with the openness of Windows and HTML and so forth, I think what the world is trying to go to is more mobile applications and making it, you know, platform independent. So whether it's Windows 10 or Windows 8 or Windows 7, it should run whatever. It should be web-based going forward. So that's kind of the direction we're looking
Steve, I'm going to put you in the hot seat here. So this aerospace engineer last night was talking about a big project, and I've heard he was working with 100 Stanford PhDs on the International Space Station, and these different teams are working. And he said the way he solved many of his problems was small teams solving problems. So he didn't get big, he broke it down to smaller teams than 100. Is this one solution that maybe an agency who's listening, should it be like an A team or something, a small squad to do this, or what's a good practice to make this transition?
You really want me to comment against
on
an
the
aeronautical
A-team.
engineer?
Yeah, those Stanford PhDs.
Thanks for that. So what I think is important to a solid implementation or a migration path is you need to partner with people that have been there, done that, right? It's a common military term. This is why Dell and Ironbow and our team is so important to us, right? Their experience in the commercial space and what they've had to deal with functional applications, even there, where you have to pay payroll and things like this, which are always kind of slower systems to kind of get upgraded, are similar lessons learned as you move into the military space. What Ironbow then brings to Dell, who has this large presence of deployment, is the understanding of the STIG process, the IA controls, and how to apply them in the environment. And that's why we partner together. We understand the federal side and how that works, and we work with them to kind of apply those settings. So we absolutely want government entities to talk to us about how we can work with them to create, yes, a small team and augment their workforce with our specialty, but teach them how to roll it out, teach them the process, good program management for change and release, all the way through to that communication plan that I referred to earlier.
Wayne, I was doing some research for this. I got a sheet of paper, and I think I ran out of ink. just trying to understand the different types of, there's branch updates, there's cumulative update. I mean, can you give us maybe a quick little summary of how these updates and these changes are different from the current operating system? There's so many different ways to update these days.
There are. I'm just going to try to use the buzzwords.
Yeah.
LTSB, CBB, in terms of current branch for business, is the path that predominantly the DoD side of the house is going, and but that becomes more of a, I'm going to say, more frequent iterative update that's needed. So you have to be a lot more agile than what we have been previously, but you've got to still at least force some of that on your environment, on your infrastructure, and you may have to look at, okay, how can I adapt to that? It is going to take some adaptation to allow that to take place, but nevertheless, that is the Microsoft model that they're coming out with. They're liking to at least continue to provide those iterative updates versus a 3-year approach or the old service packs that they used to put out maybe every 12 to 18 months or so.
Yeah. So it's a better solution than Patch Tuesday, isn't it?
Well, but I think Patch Tuesday turned into Patch Tuesday and Thursday, right? Microsoft actually started coming out with 2 patches a week. They had their patch set that was part of WSUS and how it got deployed to all your systems, and then you had Thursdays, which was a critical update, it seemed like. And it was tough to always, I think, stay ahead of that in the military space when you're trying to test the patch before you release it, but you know that Microsoft tested it pretty in depth before they released it. So you try to balance that, like, can I just release these things? I think as you look at the branch update approach, they're going to be heavier. But I think that's okay. I mean, from a network perspective, I think all across the military we have very large bandwidth, and I think that's going to go through okay.
Let's take a break, talk more about Windows 10 when we get back. My guests today are Ray Perry, Program Manager, Air Force Enterprise Configuration Management Office, Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. Tim McGrail, Acting Director, Network Operations, Department of Commerce International Trade Administration, Office of the Chief Information Officer, Wayne Salarday, Services Sales Director, Dell EMC, and Steve Bilbo, Army Enterprise Architect at Iron Bow. I'm your moderator, John Gilroy, on the discussion, The Roadmap to Windows 10 Migration in Government, sponsored by Iron Bow and Dell EMC on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.